hearken thou unto the voice of the words of the Lord. Grady's in college right now, and Grady talks about how that one of his favorite teachers that he has is very specific, Brother Parks. As he's going over their lecture, whatever they do, as he's going over it, he said, now, this is very important. I want you to write this down. And so because of that, it should be easier for Grady to take a test because every word that he said doesn't need to be written down. But whenever the teacher said, this is very important, and I don't know if I told this story or not, but Brother Wayne, I went to a class years ago, and the guy said, I want you to get the manual out. And so we got the manual out, and he said, now we're going to go through the manual, and everything I tell you to highlight, I want you to highlight. And so we just went through there, and we highlighted the things that we needed to know, and he said, all that other stuff, don't even worry about. All this is the stuff you need to know. And I still have that. That manual's probably in my basement right now, but I could open it up, and I used a pink highlighter, and many times I was able to go back and just flip through and find the highlighted portion of what I needed. And so I believe that Samuel right here that's how Samuel was trying to impress upon Saul, hey, I need you to hearken thou unto the voice of the words of the Lord. Like, if you've ever listened, you need to listen. Sometimes, and I've told y'all before that I am one, I can check out at any time. Like, I can check out in the car driving, and I can be miles and miles down the road and be like, man, I just kind of get zoned in, and I'm just miles down the road and be like, man, I completely missed. Sometimes I'll be like, I'm going to stop at we'll just say the racetrack. I'm going to stop at the racetrack and such, and I'll just get to driving down the road and just check out, and boom, I drive right by it, and all of a sudden I'm like, man, I meant to stop there. I used to do it all the time when I listened to the weather. Now it's on your phone, on your app, so you don't have to worry about it anymore. But I used to try and listen to the weather and try to hear what the weather was going to do, and I would check out every time. And about the time he was ending the weather report, I would be like, man, I missed it again. But here's Samuel, and he's trying to get Saul not to check out. He's trying to get him to understand, hey, this is very important. So in verse number 2, it says, thus saith the Lord of hosts, I remember that which Amalek did to Israel, how he laid in wait for him in the way when he came up from Egypt. So if you look in Exodus chapter number 17, this is mentioned right here. Now this Exodus chapter 17 is a very memorable chapter, obviously because the first few verses in here is talking about when they didn't have any water, and God told Moses to smite the rock, and this was the first time that he told him, and the first time that he smote the rock and they got water. We know what happened the next time when he was supposed to speak to the rock, but he smote it instead. But in verse number 8, and this is also going to be the battle where, as Joshua's fighting, that they take Moses up, and Aaron and Hur hold up the hands of Moses, and while his hands are being held up, Joshua is winning the battle. But if his hands started to come down, the children of Israel started to lose the battle. But in verse number 8, it says, then came Amalek and fought with Israel in Rephidim. And Moses said unto Joshua, choose us out men and go and fight with Amalek. Tomorrow I will stand on the top of the hill with the rod of God in mine hand. So Joshua did as Moses had said to him and fought with Amalek. And Moses, Aaron, and Hur went up to the top of the hill. And it came to pass when Moses held up his hand that Israel prevailed. And when he let down his hand, Amalek prevailed. But Moses' hands were heavy, and they took a stone and put it under him and sat thereon. And Aaron and Hur stayed up his hands, the one on the one side and the other on the other side. And his hands were steady until the going down of the sun. And Joshua discomfited Amalek and his people with the edge of the sword. And the Lord said unto Moses, write this for a memorial in a book, and rehearse it in the ears of Joshua, for I will utterly put out of the remembrance of Amalek from under heaven. And Moses built an altar and called the name of it Jehovah Nissi, for he said, because the Lord has sworn that the Lord will have war with Amalek from generation to generation. So you see right there that God, after this battle, that God said, hey, I am going to utterly destroy Amalek. Now, we know it's hundreds, it's many years later. It's many years later whenever this is going to take place, whenever Saul is going to go against this battle. But this was designed in the mind of God whenever Moses said this, that one day Saul was going to have this opportunity to take the Amalekites, to take them out. If you look in Deuteronomy chapter number 25, verse number 17, it says, remember what Amalek did unto thee, by the way, when you were come forth out of Egypt, how he met thee by the way. And so we already read that they laid in wait. And so what they did was they laid in wait, Brother Wayne, and they waited until the strong and the group went through, and they waited for the weak. Just like, if you've ever watched any kind of documentary or seen any kind of documentary, how that like the lions and them do, they sit and they wait and they watch and they pick or wolves, and they pick out the weakest in the bunch or the oldest in the bunch, and then that's what they go after. It says, how he met thee by the way, and smote the hindermost of thee, even all that were feeble behind thee, when thou wast faint and weary, and he feared not God. Therefore it shall be, when the Lord thy God hath given thee rest from all thine enemies round about in thy land, which the Lord thy God giveth thee for an inheritance to possess it, that thou shalt blot out the remembrance of Amalek from under heaven, thou shalt not forget it. So this was a very serious thing with God. Two different times he said, hey, we're not forgetting what Amalek did. And I believe that the Amalekites, they continued on in their idolatry. They continued on in their wickedness, and never repented of what they did. And so they come to this place. They come to this place now where God said, it's time for me to deal with Amalek. And so Samuel comes to Saul, and he comes to Saul and says, hey, I need you to understand, this is serious. And so he says in verse number 3, he said, now go and smite Amalek and utterly destroy all that they have, and spare them not, but slay both man and woman, infant and suckling, ox and sheep, camel and ass. Now, again, a lot of times we look at things, and we look at things in our 2025 mindset. And if you don't put yourself in those periods when these things occur, you're like, oh, that's so brutal. And it is brutal, but that's what God wanted. That's what God wanted for the Amalekites, for what they did to the children of Israel. And God said, this is what I want done. I want them utterly destroyed. Not partially destroyed, not take out the men so that, only take out the men so that they can't fight anymore, not just take out the men and the women and the children, but take the spoil. That's not what God wanted. God gave Saul very specific instructions. Verse number 4, and Saul gathered the people together and numbered them in Telaim, 200,000 footmen and 10,000 men of Judah. Now, based off the previous chapter, that's pretty good, when they only had 600 men. But it wasn't the same. It wasn't the same as before when he had over 300,000. But he's got 210,000 men to go up against the Amalekites. So it appears that he took it pretty serious. And I think a lot of times, Brother Wayne, I'm going to make a comparison to us, but I think a lot of times we look like we take it pretty serious. We show up to church on Sunday morning. We show up to church this Sunday school. We show up to church for Sunday school. We show up Sunday morning. We show up Sunday night when we have service on Sunday night. We show up on Wednesday night. And we look we look like, we're doing pretty good. But I wonder, how serious are we really taking it? I wonder, how serious are we really taking it? Are we just half-hearted Christians? I mean, Saul is about to do something, and he's going to do it 90%. Was it 90? I don't know. He's going to do it. It's going to be 90% obedience. You say, well, 90% is better than 50%. And that's true. But God wasn't satisfied with Saul's 90% obedience. God wanted 100% obedience. And I think a lot of times in our Christianity, we grade ourselves on a curve. We grade ourselves on a curve, and we compare ourselves to someone else, and we're like, I'm just as good as him. I'm better than him. I do more than him. I give more than them. I have more jobs than them. If there's a work day, I'm always there. If there's this, I'm there, and they're not there. And we compare ourselves. We set a person up as a standard, and that's not the standard. And so we grade ourselves on this curve, and Chris, the standard is obedience to God. Not whether the Sunday school teacher's doing it. Well, if the Sunday school teacher's doing it, then it must be okay. If the pastor's doing it, then it must be okay. So here, it says in verse 5, and Saul came to the city of Amalek and laid wait in the valley. So here he is, he's setting it up. And look at what he does in verse number 6. And I believe, even though we don't have all the instructions, I believe Samuel told him, hey, whenever you go up there, don't kill the Kenites. And Saul said unto the Kenites, go, depart, get you down from among the Amalekites, lest I destroy you with them. For ye showed kindness to all the children of Israel when they came up out of Egypt. So the Kenites departed from the Amalekites. Now again, I don't necessarily see where I think Saul was that religious. He did a lot of religious things, but I don't necessarily think he was that religious to know his Israel's history. To know this, and I believe it was Samuel that said, hey, like the Kenites, God doesn't want you to destroy the Kenites, so give them the opportunity. Give them the opportunity. Now it was their choice once he gave them the opportunity to say, look, you have a choice. You can leave now and be safe, and just remember, this is happening because your ancestors treated the children of Israel well. We know that Moses' father-in-law, Jethro, was a Kenite. But because of that, God has given you the opportunity. And so in verse number 7, it says, and Saul smote the Amalekites from Havilah until thou comest to Shur, that is over against Egypt. Now, when we get to that right there, it looks really good. It looks really good. I mean, it says that he smote the Amalekites from Havilah until thou comest to Shur, that is over against Egypt. And so it appears that Saul is doing exactly what Samuel told him to do. It appears. In verse number 8, and he took Agag, the king of the Amalekites, alive. Now we're going to see in the next verse, and then a few verses later, we're going to see that Saul is going to blame the people. It's the people. They wanted to do this. It was the people that wanted to save this for a sacrifice. It was the people. But if you remember from the previous chapter, the people who, I don't want to say they were starving, because they weren't starving. But they're in a fight. They're going to be in a fight with the Philistines, and because Saul has a personal grudge, he decides to say, no one's allowed to eat this day, and not one person, even though they watched Jonathan take that stick and eat that honey, they're like, hey, your dad said not to do that. So they were obedient to Saul and said, hey, if Saul says we can't eat, even though we're in a fight against an army that far outnumbers us, if Saul said not to eat, I'm scared that Saul's going to kill us. Even though we're in a fight against all these Philistines, I'm scared of what Saul's going to do, and so we're not going to eat. And so you can't have it both ways. You can't one time say, hey, you can't eat, and none of the people eat, and then the next time say, well, it's just the people, wasn't nothing I can do about it. It's them people, wasn't nothing I can do about it. They just, they did it on their own. But they did it because they followed their leader. And I think the people, I think these words, even though they from Samuel were given to Saul, I think the people knew too. Hey, we're not allowed. And again, if you're a good leader, you make your people know this is what is expected, and this is what is required. And we know, because we know sometimes God let them take the spoil, sometimes God didn't let them take the spoil. That'd have been my first question. It was funny. To me, it's funny. It's funny because obviously I hadn't really, been in school since I was homeschooled my last 2 years. So I hadn't really been in school since I was in the 10th grade. But we were up there in class this week, and one guy insisted on it because you were allowed to just kind of speak up. But one guy insisted on raising his hand like you used to do when you were in school. And he would not speak until someone called on him while he had his hand raised. And I just got a chuckle out of it because a bunch of, almost 50-year-old men, and one guy sitting there raised his hand like, ooh, teacher, call on me. But anyway, and so here is, if it were me, the first question I'd ask is, hey, when we go in here and destroy these, are we allowed to take the stuff? What are the instructions? What are the instructions? When we go in here, do we just fight the men? Are we supposed to destroy the women and the children? Are we allowed to take the stuff? Are we supposed to destroy the stuff? What are we supposed to do? Use a military term, what's the rules of engagement? What are they? What are we supposed to do? What are we allowed to do? What are we not allowed to do? Tell us. And so here is Saul, and it says he took Agag. He wasn't supposed to take Agag. He wasn't supposed to do it. So he disobeys and utterly destroyed all the people with the edge of the sword. Now, again, if Agag is the only person, if he's the only person of the Amalekites, now we know obviously that some others had to escape, but if he's the only person of the Amalekites left alive, and you're 99.9% obedient, it wasn't enough. And I think, again, like I said, I think we live in a day and age where God understands. God understands. I think we do that for ourselves. Brother Parks, I think a lot of times he doesn't understand. I think a lot of times he doesn't understand. And I understand we live in an age of grace. I understand that he knows that we're going to fall, and just man falls 7 times but rises up again. I understand all of that. But I think there's a lot of times that we justify disobedience, and we justify disobedience in our own life, and we're like, God's fine with it. And I don't think he's fine with it. I don't think he's happy. I don't, Brother Tidwell, I don't think he's happy about it. And so if you look in verse number 9, it says, but Saul and the people spared Agag, and the best of the sheep, and of the oxen, and of the fatlings, and the lambs, and all that was good. What were the instructions? Utterly destroy all. That was the instructions. But sometimes our flesh gets involved, and you're like, man, I tell you what, that's a good looking cow right there. Man, I was talking to a guy this week, and he was talking about his daughter, and she had a calf, and his daughter didn't have a calf. She had a calf that she had, and she took it to the sale, and it was it only weighed 600 pounds, and he said what she got out of it. I'm like, man, that's impressive. And he said, yeah, it was the best cow in the lot. Hers brought the biggest price. Well, I think the children of Israel, they looked and they said, I tell you what, that's a good looking cow. Our cows don't look like those cows. Our sheep don't look like those sheep. Our stuff doesn't look like that. Man, I tell you what, we could build a herd. We could build a herd if we had just a few of those cows. If we had one of those bulls right there, we could build a herd. And maybe, and they just start to kind of justify it in their mind. And I'm assuming we've all been there. There are times that God told you not to do something, and then you justify in your mind why it's okay. Or God tells you to do something, and you're like, yeah, and you don't, and you talk yourself out of it. And so somewhere they justify it in their mind. Well, we think, I tell you what, God, I know you don't want us to do this, but what if we sacrificed? And they weren't going to sacrifice them all. They weren't going to sacrifice them all. They were going to sacrifice some so that they could keep some to themselves. We'll make a sacrifice. We'll take all the good ones, and God will give you a tenth. We'll give you 10% so that we can keep the 90. And we can enrich ourselves, for Saul enrich his kingdom with what we have left over. It says they, fatlings of the lambs and all that was good, and would not utterly destroy them, but everything that was vile and refuse, that they destroyed utterly. So they went through, and again, I mean, they were prejudiced. They looked and said, oh, that's an ugly cow. Kill it. That's an ugly sheep. Kill it. That's an ugly whatever. Kill it. And so they just went through. And if it was ugly, if it was lame, if it was maimed somehow, if anything that it didn't look beautiful, they said, you can't build a herd out of that. You can't build a herd out of that. Oh, we'll give that to God. And I wonder if in our own life, that's what we give to God. We give the things to God that, I didn't really need it anyway. It wasn't actually going to be any use to me anyway. God, you can have that. And then I will justify in my mind that I did what I was supposed to. And then, God, I'll put it on you to accept the sacrifice that I'm offering, but it wasn't what God asked for. So in verse number 10, you see that then came the word of the Lord unto Samuel, saying, it repenteth me that I have set up Saul to be king. For he has turned back from following me, and hath not performed my commandments. And it grieved Samuel, and he cried unto the Lord all night. Now again, Saul, for lack of a better term, we know that Samuel wasn't king, but Samuel was the last judge, and Samuel was in charge, and Saul took Samuel's place. But yet Samuel loved Saul, and it did him no pleasure. Again, sometimes it's like, oh, well, you did me wrong. I'll be perfectly happy to go and say, you see, I told you so. And if you remember, Samuel told the people, hey, this is how it's going to go. This is exactly how it's going to go. This is exactly what's going to happen. And he also warned them, if you don't follow God, your king's not going to follow God. And so Samuel stays up all night long and cries all night long for Saul. And you think about it in a preacher's perspective. God shows preachers things. He shows them things. And he asked them to preach to the congregation. And, I would say sometimes they know exactly who they're talking to. Sometimes they just know this is the message God put on my heart. But God put this message on my heart for a reason. And sometimes, no doubt, it breaks their heart to think, I'm preaching this message. I'm preaching this message to someone that has the opportunity to repent, but they're not going to do it. Someone that has the opportunity to change, but they're not going to do it. And sometimes I'm preaching to this message to someone that God said, I'm done with them. I'm done. So in verse number 12 it says, and when Samuel rose early to meet Saul in the morning, it was told Samuel, saying, Saul came to Carmel. And behold, he set him up a place. So Saul goes to Carmel, Riley, he goes to Carmel, and he said, guys, we need a memorial. We need a memorial because we just did something amazing. We just utterly destroyed the Amalekites. And so we're gonna go here to Carmel, and we're gonna set us up a place. We're gonna set us up this thing so that when people come by and say, what was that about? And it's be like, that was the day that Saul destroyed the Amalekites. That was the day that Saul destroyed the Amalekites. And you can see it. You can see you can see how proud he was. You can see how fond of himself he was. You're going to see it in his response to Samuel here in a few moments. But you can see how arrogant he was. Oh, we destroyed the Amalekites. Saul has come to Carmel, and behold, he set him up a place and is gone about. So, if you remember, well, we haven't got there yet, but you should remember. Remember after David slew Goliath, and then the ladies were singing, and they were singing, Saul has slain 1,000, but David is 10,000. And that bothered Saul. That started somewhere, and this is one of those places, because it said he is gone about. So he went around and said, hey, I don't know if y'all noticed, destroyed the Amalekites. Have y'all heard that Saul destroyed the Amalekites? Have y'all heard? He's gone about, and he's waited for them to come out and say, oh, Saul, you're so wonderful. And passed on and gone down to Gilgal. And Samuel came to Saul, and Saul said unto him, blessed be thou of the Lord. He was so proud. He said, I tell you what, blessed Samuel, I'm so glad to see you. And there's kind of two thoughts right there in my mind. Some of it is he really was like, I did what I was supposed to do. But another part of it was he knew he was a hypocrite. And sometimes you can watch, and sometimes the person that the preacher is preaching to is the one that amens the loudest. You ever notice that? Where the person that, and again, we can pretend like we don't know people in here. We can all pretend like we don't know who people are in here, but whatever. But sometimes you're like, oh man, like, I know who that's for. And we should apply it to ourselves, but, if you're not like me, that's fine, whatever. But sometimes you're like, oh man, and then all of a sudden you're like, whoa, did he just say amen right there? Woo. And he amens the loudest. And it's not because he agrees, it's because he's like, yeah, I'm trying to cover up a little bit right here. And sometimes you go and you're like, preacher's getting pretty rough today. Sometimes he's stepping on my toes. Sometimes he's stepping on Brother Park's toes. And yet here he says, blessed be thou. He said, I'm blessed. I did everything Everything that he said, I have performed the commandment of the Lord. He said, I've done everything that God wanted done. Absolutely everything. Isn't it wonderful? It's so wonderful. Have you seen my place I set up in Carmel? I set that up for the Lord. No, he didn't. And Samuel, again, Samuel's already heard from God. God's already said Saul did not obey. And again, like I said, you can put a smile on it if you want to. You can pretend like you enjoyed the preaching if you want to. You can pretend like you obeyed it, if you want to. But most of the time, the preacher already knows you didn't do what you're supposed to do. And so here Samuel said, well, what meaneth then this bleating of the sheep in mine ears? And the lowing of the oxen which I hear? He said, your words mean nothing, Saul, because my ears didn't just hear your words, my ears hear these sheep. My ears hear these oxen. And they shouldn't be here. And Saul said, they have brought them from the Amalekites. God said in verse 7 and verse 8, and he took Agag. And then it says in verse 9, but Saul and the people spared Agag and the best of the sheep. But as soon as Samuel says, Saul, I'm not buying what you're selling. I'm not buying what you're selling. I'm not picking up what you're putting down. And so he says, hey, what meat of the... And then Saul said, it was them people. I tell you what, them people, they are so stubborn. They are so stubborn. And he says, and Saul said, they have brought them up from the Amalekites. For the people spared the best of the sheep and of the oxen, but it was for a good cause. It was for a good cause. I wouldn't have done it. I wouldn't have done it. It was really hard, and I wanted to tell them no, but then they come and said, look, we need to make a sacrifice. Like, if we're going to destroy them, then we need to make a sacrifice, and surely we wouldn't want to use our cattle and our sheep to make a sacrifice to God after He gives us this great victory. So we need to keep these sheep and these cattle alive, and we'll make a sacrifice with those sheep and those cattle. And you can put lipstick on a pig all you want to. You can put it on a pig all you want to, and you can try and cover up what it is, but disobedience to God is disobedience. And Samuel wasn't having any of it, and God didn't want any of it. And so he says, and to sacrifice unto the Lord thy God, and the rest we have utterly destroyed. Then Samuel said unto Saul, stay and I will tell thee. He already had the message. He already had the message. Stay and I will tell thee what the Lord has said to me this night. And he said unto him, say on. Let me hear it. Let me hear it. Samuel said, when thou wast little in thine own sight. And you remember, we looked at it, you remember how that Saul couldn't believe, he's, he's a tribe of Benjamin, and his family was the least of the Benjamites. And when it came time for him to be anointed king in a public place, he was hiding amongst the stuff. Y'all remember all that. He said, when you were little in your own sight, wast not thou made head of the tribes of Israel, and the Lord anointed thee king over Israel? He said, back then you had the right spirit and the right heart, but now, and it's not said in here, but it's there. He said, now it's all about you. It's all about. You remember when you first got saved? You remember when you first got saved? People could preach on anything, and you do it. They could preach on anything. They could say, get rid of this, and they wouldn't even have a Bible for it. John. They wouldn't even have any Bible for it. It was just their opinion. And you just took their opinion and said, you know what, sounds good to me. God doesn't want me to have it, and you got rid of it. But then you started getting a little cold, and you started getting, it started getting, you started getting used to it. You started getting maybe just a little lukewarm, and then you started questioning. And then you started comparing. Do I really need to? Does God really want that? And there should be some of that. I mean, you should search the scriptures. You should know, from the Bible. But then next thing you know, now you're the chapter and verse guy. If there's not a chapter and verse on it, well, show me chapter and verse where God said don't do this. Well, there's not necessarily a chapter and verse exactly lining out those things. Well, then apparently God wasn't interested in it. And you become the chapter and verse guy. And you have to be, you almost have to be just forced into obedience. And Samuel said, hey, you remember when you were little in your own eyes? It wasn't that way back then. It wasn't that way back then, but now it's all about you. The Philistines, it was you needed to be avenged of your enemies. Now you fought the Amalekites, and it was God sending you up against the Amalekites, God giving you the victory over the Amalekites. God was going to give you a complete victory over the Amalekites because he had pronounced it all the way back in Moses' day that this day was coming, and yet you made it all about you, and then you failed to be 100% obedient. He said the old Saul would not have done what you did. And there are some times where people, Brother Wayne, they just, and I hate to say it this way, they've just been in church too long. And they don't need church anymore. That's why they only come on Sunday morning. I don't need church anymore. I'm fine. Me and God, we're tight. We got this. I only need just a little bit, just a little dose, just to maintain my membership. And that's where Saul was. He didn't need God. I got this. I don't need full obedience. I can just be fine with partial obedience. I don't need to utterly destroy. I'll utterly destroy the things that I don't want. Is that not what he did? They destroyed the things they didn't want, but they kept the things that they wanted. He kept Agag, and he was parading Agag around. I don't know what eventually he was planning on doing with him, but he was parading Agag around. So does everyone see? Does everyone see? Here was the great King Agag. I, Saul, have captured King Agag and slew the Amalekites. But he wasn't little in his own eyes anymore. He'd grown up, and he was going to be like the other kings. And because of that, God was going to reject him. Thank y'all.